What did Kafka, Martindale, and McGahee have to say at the New York Giants OTA number 9? I'm going to tell you all about it, plus some takeaways and some additional insight into what they had to say. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Chena, and it is our Friday show for June 9th. And on today's program, the Giants didn't have their OTA number 9. They don't have OTA number 10. Unfortunately, the OTAs were canceled due to the poor air quality in the area, a result of the Canadian wildfires. But we did get down to, or I should say up to East Rutherford, and we did hear from the 3 coordinators. And there was a lot of interesting stuff to take away from those pressers. And I'm going to go over some of that stuff with you on today's program. Plus, I'm going to give you some takeaways, little things that kind of weren't said, but you can kind of read between the lines and see where they're going. So I've got nuggets, I've got quotes, I've got all kinds of good stuff for you on today's Locked On Giants podcast. So thank you for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And by the way, today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL. And when you enter the promo code LockedOnNFL, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. So check them out. Folks, let's get to it. We've got a lot to cover today. And I'm going to start off with defensive coordinator Wink Martindale and some of the things he had to say and some takeaways. First takeaway, he loves, and I do mean loves, Deonte Banks. Wink spoke about the characteristics he loves about Banks. And if you remember during the draft, I don't know if you saw it, but the TV cameras caught Wink Martindale grabbing general manager Joe Schoen in a bear hug after the Banks picks was announced. And we were kind of razzing Wink about that today, which was kind of cool because Wink's a good guy. I love, he's really a great interview. So I enjoy, the little banter that goes on. But what does Wink love about Deonte Banks? He mentioned the young man's short memory, that he's instinctive, that he's physical, that he can run. So I was curious. I said, Wink, how can this help the pass rush? And, Wink, I guess he thought I was thinking in terms of Pro Football Focus and the numbers there, which I really wasn't. What I was trying to get at is I had known that quarterbacks got rid of the ball quickly against the Giants. So I wanted to know what maybe the addition of Banks to the defense might do for the pass rush. So Wink said, he pointed out that opposing quarterbacks get rid of the ball quickly, and that the Giants defense last year faced the most max protection out of any team in the NFL because they can get to the quarterbacks. And I actually did a study on that for Giants Country, and I'll link that article in the show notes. But I really took a deep dive into the Giants pass rush and how, numbers are a little bit deceiving. You look at it and the rankings and you see that the Giants finished in the middle of the pack. But if you factor in some other things, the pass rush was actually a lot better than what the raw data show. So I've linked that in the show notes, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in this segment. But so yeah, he thinks that Banks can help, and why not? I mean, look, how many times did we see with the pass rush that the front seven just barely got there? And I'm not talking about in terms of a sack. I'm talking about in terms of moving a quarterback off his mark. So the idea here is if you have a cornerback, if you have defensive backs, cover guys who can blanket the receivers, then guess what? The opposing quarterback isn't going to be able to get rid of the ball that quickly because he's going to have nobody to throw to. So he's going to be forced to hold the ball longer. And hopefully that results in either a sack or, a hurry or, some kind of miscue for the offense. So that's the objective, I think, the Giants are looking for with the defensive secondary. And by the way, I would not be surprised if this year we saw maybe a few more exotic blitzes coming from the defensive secondary. Now, I mentioned, of course, there was no practice today. Just a gut feeling I have, just looking at the personnel and, what they did in college and what Wink Martindale likes to do. That would not surprise me if we see some of these defensive backs doing a lot more in terms of exotic blitzes. So we'll have to see if that comes to fruition. Wink Martindale, when he was the defensive coordinator in Baltimore, he never had a double-digit sack guy. But what he did have, and this again is in the article that I'm going to link to you, that's over on Giants Country, my study on the Giants pass rush last year. Wink Martindale had defenses that had triple digits in quarterback hits, double digits in interceptions, and mostly double digits in forced fumbles. They held opponents to under 60% of completed passes. So that was the secret sauce for Wink Martindale's pass rush. Not so much the sacks, but all the other little things. And you can throw in other factors like false starts, which are, going to create 5-yard losses. You can throw in, holding penalties, which are going to create 10-yard losses. They're just as good as sacks, by the way. So if you can draw that with your defense and your pass rush, then guess what? You can benefit from that as well. So, Wink's goal all along, and he kind of said this again today, was to move the quarterback off his spot. And last year, the Giants finished with they allowed a 61.4% completion rate against them, which was the 8th best passing defense in the league. I went and I lined everything up. That was the Giants were basically a top 10 passing defense when you factored in all the other equations. So I found that pretty interesting. And again, the outline is on Giants Country if you want to see it. This all came about because I asked Wink, I said, look, you didn't add anybody to the outside linebacker group. Where do you stand with that group? They don't really, how much do they know about Ellerson Smith, who's been injured? O'Shane Zimenez dropped off a little bit. They brought back Hottie, who Wink loves. Thibodeau and Ojulari are going to be back, hopefully healthy. And Wink basically said that he's happy with that room. He even went so far as to say that Ojulari is, quote, more sturdy, end quote. So hopefully that means that maybe Ojulari lost some of that bulk, which I suspect, by the way, was a factor in some of his injuries last year. He just got too bulky. And sometimes getting too bulky is not necessarily a good thing because it does lead to extra strain on the joints and ligaments and stuff like that. So we'll have to see. I haven't seen Ojulari up close to really see if he's, lost some bulk, but that will be something I'll be checking out for you guys when we get to the mini camp next week. All right. The other thing I want to talk about that Wink said or was asked about was what he called the green dot question. Right now, everybody seems to be interested in who's going to wear the green dot. And for those of you who didn't catch this when I mentioned it back for the first OTA report that I did, was actually OTA number 3, Bobby Okereke and Xavier McKinney are amongst the guys who are wearing the green dot with the starting defense. Wink said it's going to boil down to who is the better communicator or the best communicator. So, he says, look, I know you guys think that whoever wears the green dot is the leader of the defense. That's not how I look at it. I look at it in terms of who's the best communicator, who's relaying the calls quickly and accurately. And he pointed out to the old days, how before there was the green dot and the radio in the helmet, defensive coordinators would signal in the plays from the sideline to a guy who would take them and just run with them. So, the green dot kind of overrated, I guess you could say. Now, it does signify that whoever's going to get it is probably going to be on the field for most of the snaps, but the guy has to come off the field, there's always a secondary guy who can take up the green dots. So, if Bobby Okereke gets it permanently for the season and he has to come off the field for whatever reason, well, they can go back to Xavier McKinney if they want to. So really the green dot situation, I'm not so sure it's that big of a deal right now. And Wink certainly, explained that to us in his thinking, to shed some light on his thinking. All right, coming up next, let's hear from Kafka and hear what he had to say right after this. Hey, Giant fans, if you're looking for some pants and shorts that offer good fit, are made of high quality materials, and just make you look good, then you got to check out Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of that stiff, restricting cotton, and they use a special material that keeps you cool and dry all day long. My husband loves his Bird Dogs. He got them a few days ago, and he just wears them around the house and to do yard work and all kinds of cool things. And we know here at the Locked On Giants podcast that you will love Bird Dogs if you give them a try. So go on and check them out right now. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL. Enter the promo code LockedOnNFL, and they will throw in a free Yeti style tumbler with every order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL for your free Yeti style tumbler with any order of Bird Dog pants or shorts. Bird Dogs, you won't want to take them off. We promise you. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And again, thank you for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day or watching your first watch of the day. I want to send out a shout out, as always, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, and to everybody in between. I know a lot of my everydayers have been weighing in, and I appreciate that. I also want to say send a special shout out to everybody who has signed up for the Locked On Giants podcast subtexting community. It's a service, and the details of which are in the show notes. Basically, it's allowed me to text one-on-one with you guys. So when you send in a question or whatever, I can, shoot a text back, or, if I'm doing a mailbag segment, I have all your questions because I see them. Sometimes when you send them to me via email, they get lost in spam. I don't know why that is. I'm trying to fix that so that I don't lose those questions, but I haven't quite figured it out yet. And, well, maybe once my husband gets a break, from his work, because he's in IT, maybe he'll figure it out. But it drives me crazy. So anyway, the text service is a good way. Plus, I can also send out, little exclusives and whatnot to those people. So, I appreciate those of you who support the podcast, because it is another way to support the podcast. It's kind of like a super chat or a membership sort of thing. It's $4.99 a month. And it's appreciated. I know some of you have asked, well, how do we support you on YouTube with super chats and memberships? And we don't have that set up, but the subtexting is kind of like a membership, if you will. So do check that out. And thank you again to everybody. Let's get back to the order of business. And that is what Mike Kafka, offensive coordinator, had to say, some takeaways there. Now, the thing about Kafka is he's not going to give you a whole lot. Sometimes you have to kind of read between the lines with him, because he's just not going to tell you anything that you can sink your teeth into. I can't remember anything he's really given us that I walked away and said, oh my God, I got to quick write that up. That being said, there are little things that you can kind of read between the lines with him and, connect the dots, if you will. So amongst the things he discussed, Darren Waller was a big, topic of conversation. And the question put to him was, what can Darren Waller do for an offense, and how much more in terms of flexibility in the play calling will that open up for Kafka? And of course, he just said Darren Waller is a great teammate, a great guy, et cetera, et cetera. Didn't really answer the question. So I'm going to try to answer the question for you. So what can Darren Waller do? besides being a guy who can shoot up the seam, besides being a guy who could, if healthy, draw double team, which will open things up along the sideline, maybe open things up underneath, allowing these shorter receivers, these yards after the catch specialists to snag a ball and pick up yards after the catch or the big chunk plays. Waller obviously, can help with the deep pass. Not really a guy you want to have blocking. I think that's going to be more Bellinger's role. Bellinger, of course, will also be involved in the receiving game, but I think he's going to be the primary blocker. So, yeah, having a guy like Darren Waller on the field is going to be huge. And not just because the guy is like a skyscraper. I think he's like 6'7". So it's going to potentially open things up. And, what we have seen in the OTA practices, we've seen the Giants work on a lot of passes to the flats and, outs and all that stuff. So stuff outside of the number. We've seen some crossing patterns. We've seen some plays where, they've sent Waller up the seam or deep and they've thrown underneath and tried to get those guys open to get yards after the catch. So again, it is an experimental phase, but I would not be surprised if some of what we have seen there carries over to what they're going to do in the preseason and subsequently the season. All right. Another thing that Kafka was asked by yours truly, actually, is I was curious to know, what are the expectations for Daniel Jones in this year 2 of the offensive system? I think I phrased the question to Kafka. I said, look, you and Dable spoke about how well Daniel did last year, how he did everything you asked. So what is the next logical step? Kafka didn't give me any answers, folks. He just basically said, look, we have a plan for him. It's not something I want to discuss in a public forum. Okay, fine. I get it. I respect it. But I'm going to try and answer the question for you because I thought it was a valid question. So I went back and I looked at some notes that I had. And let's look at what Daniel improved last year. Let's recap that real quickly. So he improved his pocket movement, ball security, accuracy on the short to intermediate ranges, passes, ball handling, decision-making, situational awareness, and he also improved when to take a sack and when to throw the ball away. So what can he improve this year? All right, so I've identified a couple things. Number one, move off the first read. He's going to have to, a lot of his passes last year, I think, were to the first read. If you want to survive as a quarterback and take your game to the next level, you got to be able to, more often than not, get off the first read, especially if that first read is covered or maybe there's not a big chunk play to be gained there. The other thing, can Daniel Jones operate more efficiently out of the pocket? He was in shotgun a lot last year. And, shotgun is great, but at some point, you're going to have to operate out of the pocket, which is something he really didn't do a whole lot of last year. So that's a big thing. And then, of course, there's the deep ball accuracy. Now, on the first 2 OTAs that the media was allowed into, OTA 3 and 5, I think I've mentioned how they were doing a lot of deep passes, a lot of deep shots down the field. They were in 7-on-7 situations. There was no pass rush, obviously, because it's non-contact. As far as accuracy went, Daniel was on point. But again, when you don't have a pass rush in your face, when you don't have, guys at the line of scrimmage who are getting their hands up in the passing lane to cloud your vision, when you don't have people trying to move you off your spot, yeah, you're going to be a lot more accurate. So really, the proof's going to be in the pudding once we get to the summer. And can Daniel Jones continue to look as good as he did in the springtime with those deep passes? Now, just real quick, before I forget, somebody asked me in the subtext community, said, hey, will the mandatory minicamp next week be non-contact or will there be contact? It'll be non-contact, folks. So everything in the spring is non-contact. So we'll have to wait until the pads go on in the summertime to really appreciate how far Daniel Jones has come along, and also to get a better idea of maybe other elements that maybe I'm missing here in my takeaways that the coaches have identified for Daniel Jones to improve on. Okay. One other point brought up to Kafka was the dead ball snap. Now, I told you, I think on a previous show, that one of the questions I had put down in my notebook was there any advantage to going with to using the dead ball snap over the traditional snap? Kafka didn't really give me an answer. I did ask the question, didn't really give me an answer. Basically, he said that, it all comes down to comfort level. So that might be a question I'm going to circle back with when Daniel Jones next speaks, just to see if what he has to say about it. And, because, look, maybe there isn't an advantage. Maybe it's just not a big deal. But I think it's a question that needs to be asked, because if any little advantage that they can get, and I've had football people tell me that the dead ball snap can be a quicker snap for a quarterback center exchange. So any little advantage that the Giants can get, if, and using the dead ball snap, or are they going to use the dead ball snap maybe in certain situations? I don't know, but I'd like to find out a little bit more about that if I can. So those are questions that I think I want to ask next time Daniel Jones gets to the podium, and we'll see what he says. He probably won't tell me much, but I'm going to ask. It's all I can do, right? Is ask. So, all right. Coming up next, we're going to hear from T-Mac, Thomas McGahee, the special teams coordinator. Don't go anywhere. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and this is our Friday show. Next week, mandatory minicamp. That'll be on Tuesday and Wednesday. There's the mandatory minicamp in the past is usually 3 days. Head coach Brian Dable, however, is not holding it for a third day. They're going to do a team building activity of some sort to be determined. And no, the media wasn't invited. I mean, I don't think we will be. It would be nice, but I don't think we will be. It's all good. It's okay, because it just basically means we could start our vacations a little bit earlier if we want to. And speaking of which, I'm still trying to decide whether or not to do 5 days a week or 3 shows a week, which is what we usually do in the summertime. I might do something in between, or depending on what topics I have. Maybe 1 week I'll do 5, 1 week I'll do 3, but a lot of you have been encouraging me to take some time off. I guess it means you're sick of me, right? 5 days a week. But no, seriously, we'll play it by ear, and I'll make sure that you get some quality content when I do decide to do shows, as always. And speaking of which, next week, I'm hoping to have Ed Valentine on the program with me to talk about the upcoming mandatory minicamp, sort of a little preview. And I am working on an interview for that'll probably run for next week. Actually, it will run for next week. So really, I came up with this idea when I was driving home from the Giants practice facility. I said, "Oh, I've got to do this particular interview because I think you guys will like it. It has to do with, I'll give you a hint. It has to do with Saquon." So, and that's all I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to go into the details. You're just going to have to tune in. And then, of course, next week, I also hope to get with Tana and Bad Dog. We made contact. We haven't done a live show in forever. So hopefully I can get with those two guys and we can do a live show. I know you guys like the live show. I love the live show as well. So stay tuned for details. Once I know, I will put that in the community section over on YouTube, because that's where the live show is hosted. And we'll just rock and roll here. But otherwise, Ed Valentine probably for Monday. And then mandatory mini camp reports on Tuesday, Wednesday, hopefully live show on Thursday. And then we'll see what happens on Friday. I'll maybe just do a wrap-up type of thing on the spring off season. Okay, let's get back to today's topic, which is hearing from the coordinators. What were some of the takeaways and some of the key things said? And in this segment, I'm going to talk about Thomas McGahee, the special teams coordinator, T-Mac. Folks, as expected, T-Mac does not like the new kickoff rule. Now, he didn't say it in so many words, but it was pretty obvious he is not a fan of the new kickoff rule, which for those of you who don't know what it is, now when a kickoff is done, the returner can call for a fair catch anywhere between the 25, 0 and the 25-yard line, and the ball will automatically be spotted at the 25. So it basically takes away the kickoff return. And there is not, based on what I've seen and heard, there's not a single person who likes this rule other than the people who obviously voted for it, the owners. So T-Mac not too happy with it. And I don't blame him, but that being said, T-Mac is not the type who is going to sit there and complain. He said, they'll adjust. So what are the fallouts? What are the ramifications now of this rule? How can they adjust? Well, here's the problem. Graham Gano, the Giants kicker, was very good at those short kicks, just getting the ball to like the 1 yard line and forcing a return. Gano was an expert at that. Now this new rule kind of nullifies that. So potentially we could see more squib kicks moving forward. Now here's the problem with squib kicks. They can be fielded higher up on the field. So, if you're kicking the ball and somebody hustles over and quick fields it, at like, say, the 30-yard line, you're giving up good field position. The other problem with the squib kicks is that, if they're not struck properly, they could go out of bounds. And that's a penalty, and you're giving up field position. So it's going to be interesting to see how special teams coordinators across the league deal with this new rule, which, by the way, I hate. Me personally, I do not like it. I think it takes out a strategic element of the game. It also takes out, an exciting part of the game. But I didn't get a vote, so I got to deal with it just like everybody else does. So, yeah, we'll see how they adjust. T-Mac, he'll come up with something. He's a good special teams coach. He'll come up with something. What that something is, I'm just not sure. But, I did ask T-Mac about this new rule and how does it affect how you build the special teams units? Because, every year, every roster has 5 to 10 guys who are strictly for special teams. And now, you don't really need cover guys if teams are going to constantly call for fair catches. I mean, how does this affect them? And, T-Mac mentioned Carter Coughlin. He mentioned Cam Brown, who are core special teamers. And it'll be, we'll see how it goes, but it does sound like some of these guys who made their living on special teams might have, their snaps reduced, which is going to really suck because it's going to necessitate maybe not carrying certain guys and just going in different directions. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But you could kind of tell that T-Mac was, concerned about that. So we'll see how that plays out in the summertime. All right. Another thing he was asked about was why have an additional long snapper? So they have this guy, Cam Lyons, on the roster. Now, the official explanation from T-Mac was that this isn't a competition with incumbent Casey Kreiter, that, Cam Lyons is a good young player. He can give Casey a break. Here's the thing. It's not like Casey Kreiter is out there snapping 20 times a game. I don't think that's the case with him. I mean, long snappers, they're snapping basically for field goals, extra points, and punts. And those are just a handful of snaps. And the more you do it, the better. And quite honestly, look, Casey Kreiter has always been a good snapper, but last year, maybe it was just me, and I could be wrong here, but I don't think I am. I mean, I looked at this. I didn't think Casey Kreiter snapped as well as he had the prior year. I thought some of his deep snaps were slow. There was one block punt on a snap that I thought was really slow to come out of his hands. Some of his shorter snaps, I thought lacked accuracy, were it not for a good job by Jamie Gillian to corral it and get it set. I question what would have happened. I don't know. To me, Casey Kreider just didn't look like he had a good year last year. So this whole thing about, oh, this isn't a competition, this is to give him some relief. Well, then why not give some relief then to Graham Gano, who, who will have to do all the kicking, or to Gillian for that matter. Why just to Kreider? So, I'm sorry. I think there is a little bit of a competition here with the long snapping. And, look, I get it that, T-Mac doesn't want to, put that out there, but I'm pretty sure there's a competition there, if I'm, being honest with you. All right. Speaking of the punt team and Jamie Gillian, look, we can all agree that last year he wasn't consistent, that there were a few punts that he shanked and that were just flat out ugly looking. But that being said, and this is a point that I've made repeatedly, the gunner play really lacked last year. And part of the reason it lacked was because they had a revolving door at gunner, because of the injuries on offense and defense. Guys they had earmarked for gunner were getting rotated in and out. And there was never an opportunity to establish consistency. So I asked T-Mac about that. I said, how much did the revolving door at gunner affect Jamie? And he basically said that, look, they want continuity. They prefer continuity. And, he said it was holistic as far as, the effect that had. He said, ideally, you want continuity on special teams amongst your core guys, because that will establish a comfort level. And think back to all the times last year, Jamie Gillian got a good punt off, but because the Gunners didn't get down the field in time, that ball either, was fielded or it rolled into the end zone instead of being downed inside the 5. So, how much of a difference would it make for him to have consistent gunner play? Probably a big enough difference. Now, that said, again, Jamie Gillian's got to stop with the shanks, because it just seemed like, every other week there was an adventure with him punting. He's got a strong leg. He does lack touch with the pooch kicks. That was a problem for him last year. So I'm not putting all the punting problems solely on the gunner play or lack thereof the gunner play, but it's all connected, if you will. And that was a big yet underrated part of why I think the Giants punt coverage team just wasn't very good last year. So we'll have to see how that comes along. All right, Giant fans, that will do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, thank you for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day, or watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Tune in next week. Ed Valentine will be with me. Then we'll have the mini camp reports, which I will get out to you as quickly as I can. Hopefully the live show will be next week. And then we'll see what Friday brings, still to be determined. So in the meantime, everybody, have a great, great weekend. And I'll see you on Monday.